Good morning, everyone. I can see that you are joining the room this morning. It's really great to have you here for this webinar. We just wait to get started. We're waiting for the room to fill up, so I'm just keeping an eye on the numbers. Thanks for joining us here today for Towards New Digital Frontiers. We just about thought that winter was over. We've had quite a mild winter up in Joburg, but here we are on a cold and cloudy day. As you enter the room, could you let us know who you are and where you work in the chat, and please address your chat to everyone. It's nice for us to be able to know who's here in the room with us, so we know who we're chatting to. There's a little drop-down menu. You'll see a drop-down arrow next to the to field, and if you click on that, you should be able to address everyone. So please let us know so we can welcome you. I can see the room's filling up nicely. We will get started shortly. I'm just going to give you a couple more minutes because time doesn't always, everybody doesn't always make it in all at once. It's good to be here today with Zaf and Markos and Conrad and Megan. I will do an official introduction once we get the ball rolling, so that the people who join a bit later don't miss getting to know the panel. But we've been having nice chats. And also just to let you know up front that we will have a Q&A session towards the end of the panel. So if you have any questions for our panel, please feel free to ask them in the chat. We will get them answered as we proceed. It's great to have you all here. Thanks for joining us. Don't be shy. Please let us know who you are in the chat. We'd love to see who's joined today. I am going to kick off officially. I have seen some comments coming through in the Q&A. So hi. Oh, it says the chat is disabled. Well, thank you for letting me know that. I'm going to just very quickly send a message to someone on my team and see if they can sort that out. And then I'll be back with you. Thank you to the intrepid people who let me know in the Q&A. I have asked my team members if they can help us out. So hopefully I'll let you know as soon as we have the chat back online. In the meantime, let's get started. Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Towards New Digital Frontiers, brought to you in partnership with CFO South Africa and iOCO, EOH's end-to-end systems integrator. With me in the Zoom room today, I have digital trends expert Conrad Blignaut, C CFO Zaf Mohamed, FNB CFO Markos Davias, and EOH CFO Megan Pydigadu, I learned that, who will unpack how you can run a successful and sustainable business in a digital world. The future is here. Reality is now virtual, and so is business. With this new digital reality comes new business risks and opportunities, including cybersecurity, the metaverse, cryptocurrencies, and more. Giving your business a digital reboot continues to be one of the major drivers of competitive advantage that no leader can afford to ignore. This is especially true in a digitally enabled hybrid world post-COVID-19, where the pace of digital transformation seems to be speeding up. Before I hand over to our panel, I'm going to run a quick poll to get a sense of where our audience is at in terms of future tech in their organizations. It should pop up on your screen now. Please help us by filling it in. It's completely anonymous. Yeah, so I'm going to do that now. Starting the poll, launch. So the questions are: question 1, what are the biggest challenges you expect to have to deal with in terms of digitalization in your business? What are your top 3 concerns about going into the metaverse? And what do finance professionals need to think about when considering cryptocurrencies for their business? So yeah, if I can just ask you to please pop on that poll. At least the poll isn't disabled. I can see your responses are flooding in. So thanks very much for that. We've got great comments in the Q&A coming in, because that's clearly what we're using. So if you do have questions, you can please pop them in the Q&A and I will attend to them, since the chat is disabled for now. But we've got people saying they're excited to be here to learn from the experts. So it's good to have you. I can see that the poll responses are coming in. We're getting some quite interesting, the dials are moving. So I'll just give you another minute to just tackle that, because it'll inform where we go next with Conrad. But thanks so much for your responses. I'm just going to give it a few more minutes. I can see we've been joined by a whole lot of new people. Okay, I think it's looking good. I'm going to give you 10 more seconds and then I'm going to end the poll. Ending the poll now. And I've got the opportunity to share results, Conrad, because I know that you want to take a look. So everybody, you should be able to see them on screen. Conrad, can you?
I can, yeah, thank you.
Okay. So if you want to just have cast your eye over it. What I really like about this is how small the other category is, because it means that we aced those responses. So that's a good indicator. But is it pretty much what you expected?
Well, it's certainly interesting to see the comment around partnership being the biggest outcome there. And it's so important, because I think in the world we're moving into, it's all about picking the right partners. So that's an interesting outcome. We'll talk some more about that. And then the Metaverse question, extremely interesting, and it just goes to show, I think, that there's a lot of information out there about the Metaverse, but probably not a lot of understanding about it. So again, we'll talk some more about that. Yeah. So very interesting.
Okay, great. I'm going to stop the share on that now. And then Conrad, I'm going to hand over to you. You're here to deliver an illuminating presentation on the new digital frontiers. There's some really exciting stuff in there. So over to you. I think that let's the rest of us go off screen so that Conrad can own the room.
All right, thank you, Georgie. And can you just let me know when the presentation is showing?
Sure, it isn't yet.
Still not?
Still not, but it worked fine in the practice session.
All right, let's have another go at that.
And you're definitely still the co-host, I checked, so you should be allowed.
All right, we'll have another go. Just a seckie.
There we go. It says you've started screen sharing. We don't have it's not up yet, but I'm sure it'll come up any second. There's usually a bit of a delay. There we go. Perfect.
All right, brilliant. Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And thanks, Georgie, for that introduction. Perhaps before we start talking about the new digital frontiers, and I've got the privilege today of introducing some very interesting topics. Let's just take a moment to reflect on some of the key drivers for change in our current business environment. And I'm sure there'll be no surprise that digital transformation is right at the top of that list. It's nothing new. It's been a business imperative for a good few years now. And there are lots of stories about fabulous successes, but also about some spectacular failures. And I'm sure our audience will have been exposed to those. Cybersecurity, the second big driver, and I think that this should always be at the top of the agenda for any board, for any exco. Analysts tell us there's a staggering statistic that 85% of organizations worldwide were victim to a successful cyber attack in the last 12 months. I mean, that's just incredibly scary. And then, of course, COVID-19, we can speak volumes about that. But this pandemic has forever shifted the world of work, customer expectations, and created significant challenges and opportunities for business leaders. So these are the challenges in our fast-paced business environment today. I think it's useful to just think about some of the important foundational building blocks that we as leaders need to put in place to respond to this. And look, depending on who you talk to, you'd probably get a slightly different list. I have highlighted some of the items here that, in my recent experience, is some critical pieces of the puzzle. So it will come as no surprise that top of the list, once again, is the ability to enable our workforces to work from anywhere, and making sure that we've got the correct collaboration platform in place. And of course, hand in hand with that, comes having the right cybersecurity technology in place, to protect our network, protect our information assets, particularly as people work remotely and work from anywhere. And the reality is that the security technologies of yesterday that were largely designed for in-office environments and on-premise environments, that those security technologies will not stack up in future. And so it's an important area for leaders to invest and make sure that you've got the right capabilities in place. Cloud would come as no surprise that cloud needs to be at the center of a response to this fast-paced world. And whether you're talking about enabling your business applications to run as a service from the cloud, whether you're talking about leveraging opportunities for infrastructure provision from the cloud, whether you're talking about speed to market that comes from cloud capabilities, it needs to be central to this response. And then something that's often overlooked is the importance of a modern digital identity and access management system or platform. Again, some of the legacy technologies that we've had in this space are just not able to provide us with what we need in future. If you think about digital identity, whether it's for our staff, for our customers, for partners, it's such an important component of making sure that we know who we are transacting and engaging with, and allowing single sign-on and interoperability across various solutions. So like I say, there's probably a more exhaustive list one can talk about, but I thought it useful just to reflect on some of these building blocks. Right at the center of that, people, culture, and skills. If you're in the IT industry, you'll know that there's an incredible war for talent going on today for digital skills, for cybersecurity skills. And as we start to look forward and think about the future, as business leaders, we need to start thinking about what that next wave of skills and capabilities will need to be to compete in some of the technologies we're about to talk about. So I'm going to move on to just looking forward a little bit to some of the potential candidates on the emerging technology list for the next wave of digital disruption. And some people might argue some of these are not even emerging, but these technologies are here. Again, the list of things you look at will probably be different depending on who you talk to, but I've selected these 5 to briefly introduce today. And I think in the time we've got, I'll literally scratch the surface and hopefully set the scene for some more detailed discussion with the panel. So the first technology I've chosen to highlight is central bank digital currencies. So this is a form of cryptocurrency, and it's digital cash. But the difference being, to the traditional bitcoins, etc., is that it's linked to a country's currency and controlled by the central bank. So in a sense, one gets the benefits of crypto, but hopefully with fewer issues around instability and lack of regulation. So the interesting thing when you look at these CBDCs is how extensively it's being explored by central banks across the world. You can see from the slide here, 105 countries representing 95% of global GDP exploring these digital currencies in some form or another, and 10 actually already launched, and I believe Nigeria was the second country to launch, which is very interesting. Closer to home, the South African Reserve Bank has run a couple of pilot projects in the wholesale payment space, and that actually has been ongoing since 2018. So you can see, it is being taken quite seriously by the Reserve Bank. And last year, the Reserve Bank also launched a feasibility study around retail use cases for digital cash. So again, lots of implications and things to think about, when you look at this particular topic. Second topic I think is useful to think about is blockchain. Now, blockchain, of course, is not a new topic. It has been around since the launch of Bitcoin way back in 2009. But in many ways, I think the potential of blockchain is still untapped beyond cryptocurrencies, quite well established in the crypto world, but lots of other use cases out there. And if you look at the kind of investment that's going into the space, $11 billion being invested in the technology this year, it just demonstrates, how much opportunity there is to unlock new use cases. Particularly if you keep in mind that that kind of investment is on top of a number of business applications that are already in place around blockchain. So definitely technology to keep thinking about and keep an eye on. NFT is the next one to highlight. So NFT is a digital token that represents a real-world asset. And what we've seen in the last couple of years is a ballooning in the trading of NFTs. There's a blockchain analytics firm called Chainalysis. And according to the analysis, the NFT marketplace is worth a staggering $41 billion in 2021. And just to put that into context, if you go back to 2020, the global market for conventional art sales, in other words, just the traditional art sales market, was about 50 billion. So what that says is by 2021, this new marketplace, if you like, has reached the size of about 80% of the traditional conventional art marketplace. And another stat on this is CNBC reported a 700% growth in NFT trading volumes between Q2 and Q3 last year. So just a massive growth in the space. Now, the initial focus here has been on art and music, but of course, there are a number of potential use cases across industry. And again, we've just touched on some of those in the slide here, some of the particularly financial use cases that are out there. Touch on the metaverse. It was one of the questions, and again, there was a lot of. I think there's so many definitions out there. I like the simple definition by Merriam-Webster that says it's a highly immersive virtual world where people gather to socialize, work, and play. Nice simple definition. Metaverses are digital universes with assets that can be converted into real currency. Now, the reason why Metaverse is such a big deal is because of the multiple use cases that exist that have the potential to overhaul entire industries. You can see one of the bullet points there, McKinsey, forecasting that in only 8 years from now, we'll be looking at potentially $5 trillion in revenue changing hands in the metaverse. So lots of massive investments in this space, lots of the big players piling in. But of course, it's still very early days for this technology, and then a number of challenges, with this maturing, and we'll talk some more about those, no doubt, as we go into the panel discussion. The last area I'd like to highlight is decentralized finance. And perhaps just to place this into context, if you think about centralized finance or sort of conventional finance that we're used to, that's where the transaction happens between two parties, and that transaction is generally controlled, governed by a centralized system. That's how finance and financial transactions work. So the world of decentralized finance, or DeFi, as it's called for short, talks of a concept where the middleman is removed, and that utilizes cryptocurrency and blockchain technologies. So it's a peer-to-peer transaction without a middleman. And you can see from the stats here, there's clearly some traction for this concept with the amount of money in the system. But of course, once again, there's a complete lack of regulation in the space. So there will still be some significant risks, for example, related to consumer protection. So quite a long way to go. So Georgie, that's kind of just to give you a little bit of a whistle-stop tour on some of the emerging technologies, really hoping to just set the scene for a very engaging panel discussion. So thanks, Georgie, back to you with that.
That's great, Conrad, and Marcus and Megan, please also, and Zaf, please join us back on camera. Conrad, the one thing that I found so interesting about that is that I kind of thought that that non-fungible NFTs were crazy online art deals, and I'm very interested to learn that they have application in the real world and in business. So is that kind of like blue sky thinking, or to the best of your knowledge, are there people actually applying NFTs in the workplace or in business?
No, look, the absolute, as I said, the initial focus has been largely in art and music. But, you know, if you think about the attributes of NFTs, you know, the fact that it's unique, you know, the fact that, you know, it's difficult to tamper with because of it being built on a blockchain type technology. You know, I think there are endless possibilities around use cases, and a number of use cases already in play. For example, in real estate, you know, if you think of an NFT as a token that becomes a digital title deed at some point in time. You know, those are the kinds of applications that I think the surface is being scratched on at the moment.
Okay, great. So let's now hear about real world applications of these broader technologies. So over to you, Markos. Could you tell me how you are thinking about this journey into a digital future? Is it a sure thing that business is going to get disrupted, and how do you decide on what priorities to focus on or address?
Thanks, Georgina, and morning, everybody. Yeah, I mean, to touch a little bit on some thoughts from Conrad's presentation was just around for the auditors and accountants in the room. It would be interesting to see when the next IFRS standard comes out on how to account for the Metaverse and its digital assets. So it's definitely something that is topical for everyone, and I think if you haven't started to think about it, you're probably already quite far behind. And a journey to a digital future, I guess, starts with a few key points from my perspective. So there's a couple of things that I've learned in our group is if you don't have a good data story or data architecture, actually you can have all the digital you want, but you actually don't get the color and context you need from the activity that's coming from the digital world. And if you look at kind of even the social media platforms, I think a large part of their sort of thesis is on customer data, and that data is all digital, which makes it easy to track and understand as such. So it's a very important kind of point. I think that is key, and every industry has its own story around what its data will tell. So I mean, obviously in banking it'll be different to potentially in telco, as Zaf might touch on, and then there's crossover points where the data actually is uniquely similar. But understanding your data is a good starting point, if you ask me, and then kind of building from there. It also helps, obviously, with all your other capabilities, if you've got a good data architecture to digitize finance, risk, and the other sort of operational areas become much easier with the digital front end that's considered the data architecture as well. I think in our industry, we certainly are already getting disrupted, and many of you kind of know the fintech world and how it has evolved. But it's good disruption because it kind of keeps us on our toes and forces us to think about our customer and put them at the center of everything we do, particularly around efficiencies and the like. So that's an important piece. And then finally, on prioritization, I mean, I think everyone has to figure this out a little bit for themselves from a digital journey perspective. But certainly the things I prioritize when going through this with my own teams is ensuring the education is there. So we spend a lot of time on training and teaching our guys a little bit about these topics. So today would be a good example of one of those interventions where you just get to learn a little bit more about what is the metaverse, what are these topics, lots of hype around it out there. Is it real? Isn't it real? So spending time on those aspects. From there on, after we actually do little POCs and we let them actually play around with it. So for example, in our automation journey, we bought the whole of finance in RMB at the time. Digital units that they had to build and roboticize themselves as such. I think it's called the Raspberry Pi or something to that effect. So I can't remember the exact name now. And so they built one of those, and there were a couple of those different things that we did. We also then gave them all basic Python training as an example, which I thought was also a good starting point. And from there, they start to do it themselves. The system takes over. So yeah, that's it, Georgina.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. It sounds like fun. I'd love to play with a Raspberry Pi. So Megan, over to you. You have a great story about bringing EOH into the future or the present, I guess. So please tell us a bit about what a tech company had to do to play catch up.
Thanks, Georgie. Yeah, and I think it builds on what Markos says. You need to have the basics in place before you can start moving forward. And I think we always tell the tale of EOH being the cobbler's son. So when we got to EOH 3 years ago, even though we sold all this tech to our customers, we hadn't invested in ourselves. And so from a finance perspective, we were doing a consolidation of over 272 companies on Excel. It gave me the cold shivers when I walked in. And so we quickly had to put like the basic building blocks of systems in. So consolidation systems to make sure that the data we were reporting to the market and investors was solid and correct and off a proper system. Putting budgets systems in place as well. We never had budgeting systems either. And then also touching on Markos's point around data, like at the end of the day, finance really has to give insights and add value into the business. And for us, getting our tools right around our BI tools and insight tools that we use and how we access that data, and that there is a golden record of the data, and there's single truth out there in terms of the numbers that you're reporting is quite critical in any organization. And that's been a significant journey for us. We're in some of the final phases in terms of getting our systems up to scratch. And that's our ERP, which had been wholly customized and had no path to upgrade. So we've chosen a new ERP system that is cloud native. And I also think that it's relevant for the world within which we live now. You don't want necessarily, well, in our environment, an ERP system that is on a server in your offices. You want it in the cloud and people being able to access it directly. So that's been part of our journey. And then also Conrad touched a bit on new ways of work and how we work now in a hybrid environment. And that's also quite critical because you might have someone doing payments sitting in a coffee shop. How do you know that the network is safe, that they're accessing? And so the way historically companies used to think about their networks, and a lot of it was on a traditional manner of you come through on an MPLS network into a central point. There's a lot of opportunity there to get attacked and vulnerability points. And so now we've moved to what's called zero trust networks, where you don't trust anything that comes onto your network, and you have to validate it at source before it can access. And so we've also moved to that, which also means everyone is going directly to the cloud versus having to go through a virtual private network, which can end up being quite slow and cumbersome from an access of systems perspective. So that's been part of our journey as to where we get to. And then we've also focusing quite strongly and heavily in terms of our data strategy, making sure we're getting that right. We've got the tools and that we have clean data so that we can provide further insights into business.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's that data is king argument that we hear pretty much every day now. So over to you, Zaf. I've dubbed you a disruption realist, and I'd like to hear what your views are on all these disruptive technologies businesses are grappling with right now.
Thanks, and hello, everyone. Thanks for calling me a realist. I've had to be a realist for the last 3.5 years at CLC because, when you realize that business is real and you still have to deliver what a customer wants, then you realize that disruption's always been there. And it's been there from way back when. The steam engine was the best example of disruption, the Industrial Revolution. So I think disruption happens all the time. I think the question for me, particularly in terms of the digital frontier discussion, is how are you able to use the digital disruption to help your customer in the first instance and help your company? So in other words, how do you monetize that? Yes, absolutely. Markos made the point that it's about improving efficiencies. And what we did as CLC was to say, well, how can we become more efficient? For those of you that have postpaid contracts, it's probably easier to apply for a bond than it is to get a new cell phone contract for a 20,000 rand device. And if you really think about signing a 24-month contract, when you get a fiber contract to your home, you don't buy a TV with that. And so what you're seeing is not just the digital disruption, but what you're seeing is the behavior, not only of your customer, but also of your staff, in terms of how digital disruption affects how you do business. And so for us, what we're saying is we had to make a fundamental change. And our change was born out of survival rather than a competitive need to change. And sometimes that's the best melting pot to find out if your strategy is going to work or not. And at the risk of repeating what everyone else has said, is digital just an enabler? And how you enable business and how you enable customer. Markos made the point about putting the customer at the center of everything you do, and FNB does that fantastically. And for those of you that don't know, their back end is a Cell C network that is roaming on an MTN network. So when you put all of that together, what you find is that when telco came out 25 years ago, it was cutting edge at the time. But what you're finding today is you're finding a bank like FNB dealing with a customer that's using a Cell C network that is being hosted on an MTN infrastructure. And so your view of what is competitive and what is not changes completely. Who owns that customer? Is it MTN? Is it Cell C? Is it FNB? The reality is FNB has the customer relationship because they're very, very good at it. And they know how to put the customer first. And it's in conjunction with the whole suite of things that they do. So will Cell C become a financial services provider, compete with MTN? Now, digital makes that possible. So what you find is that the competitive landscape changes and the efficiency of how you do business and how you're able to monetize the customer changes substantially. And for those people, and I think Megan made the point really well, is how does EOH, for example, change the way they do business? They were forced into that change. FNB were not forced into that change. FNB did it because of their customer. So I think that digital is a disruptor in the sense of what it does to the entire value chain, all the way from where you procure your services to how the customer sees value and what value you supply to the customer. And from a Cell C perspective, what we're saying is we want to be a part of that chain and we want to add the value within that chain. We don't want to be everything to anybody. We just want to be the best at what we can do. And so change in our business model was really related to how we become more efficient. And that's what digital enabled us to do.
Okay, that's great, Zaf. Thank you. Thank you so much for those insights. And we're hearing things from both sides on customer centricity. Markos, I'd like to know from you, in the financial services space, what do you think the next frontier of digital disruption will be? I mean, you've talked broadly, but are you willing to stick your neck out and name a couple of specifics? And would it be a spoiler to say it's going to be blockchain and digital currencies?
I'm sure that's one that's very topical and definitely one that we're investing a lot of capacity and time into. But yeah, I mean, it's coming at us, as Zaf mentioned, from many directions. Different types of competitors entering the field and disrupting different parts of the business. So the big thing is a bank does multiple different capabilities. And what we're seeing is different pockets being attacked by these capabilities and these fintechs. And that technology is improving. It's becoming better, faster, more secure, and cheaper. And therefore, we're having to invest into that. I think the big disruptor, personally, which may sound a bit odd on this call, but it's one that's most topical right now, and I'm not sure if the others will comment on it, but is I think the skill shortage and the talent war for the skills required to do this is one that's actually playing in stronger. And that for the first time, you're having a ShopRite through ShopRite X competing with FNB for tech resources as an example. And I'm sure it multiplies as you think about all the different corporates playing in this digital space. So that's a big challenge at the moment. And then on your spoiler, I mean, yes, I think those are definitely features in our industry that are coming to play. The issue at the moment is obviously regulation and the fact that banks have to comply with a lot of different legislation, and at the moment it's very difficult to do so in the worlds that this decentralized blockchain operates in. But effectively, I'm comfortable that we are still investing in it, because over time, and as you heard from Conrad, these things will start to get some form of regulation and some form of guideline around how they operate. And as that comes in, it will make it easier for the banks to play. So you can't wait for it to arrive. You've got to be investing ahead of the game, which we're trying to do. I think the final point is just, if you do put your customer at the center and you think about, good conduct, with cryptocurrency at the moment, if you lose your Bitcoin code, token number, whatever you want to call it, effectively that's it, you've lost the coin. If the bank did that, I mean, there'd be a riot if we lost people's money in that form, and you can't reset your password or the like. So they're just two different worlds, and unfortunately at this stage we've got a lot of work to do to sort of close the gap on how they can play and operate together. And I guess these central bank coins or stable coins are a way to start to do that. The last piece is I definitely think tokenizing assets is going to be something that is going to be big in the shorter term than sort of crypto itself. So for example, if you think about what the central bank is doing with a project called EOCO 2, is to effectively tokenize government securities so that those operate off the back of a blockchain as opposed to the current infrastructure that they do. And if you think about Conrad's presentation, you can tokenize any asset, including a property, or if you really wanted to, Georgina, those glasses you're wearing, we can tokenize them and you can sell them to someone digitally as opposed to physically as well. So there's different ways this thing's going to transpire, and it's going to take time for all of us to kind of figure it out. But I think the disruption's actually going to come incrementally as opposed to this big bang. But if you're not ready for it, you're going to fall behind quickly. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, good insights. Megan, to tackle another tech buzzword, and Conrad definitely gave us some starter insights. One of the future tech buzzwords on everyone's lips right now is the Metaverse. Conrad touched on it in his presentation, but can you give us a real world example of what the Metaverse means for business right now? Yeah, do you know of any companies that are actually making a play in this space? Sorry, that's a big jumbled question.
So if you look at what McKinsey says, they estimate by 2030 that the spend in the metaverse will be 5 trillion. I think good examples of the most advanced metaverses are actually in the gaming industry. So the likes of Fortnite and Roblox, those are really good examples of the metaverse. Currently, from a business perspective, the metaverse, it's still highly fragmented. So there are a lot of different platforms out there. And the other issue is generally the platforms have their own tokens or, payment forms. So they aren't necessarily fungible between platforms. So you can't have money on one platform and then walk to another metaverse and, spend it there. So I think those are some of the things that people are grappling with as to who do you choose and who do you back from a platform perspective. For example, in Africa, we've got our own metaverse, which is called Ubuntu Land. And EOH is currently looking at buying some land there. I do know MTN is already there from a metaverse perspective. But generally, I think the first type of industries that would go into the metaverse are more B2C type businesses. So where you can have online stores for consumers. And if you look at Xero, which is the fast fashion, they've launched their first solo collection into the metaverse, where you can actually go and buy Zara clothes in the metaverse. So there are a lot of use cases there. I also think the travel industry could be interesting in terms of you want to book into a hotel or go to a place and you don't know if you quite like it, but if you could put on an Oculus headset and go and walk around in that hotel, see what it's like, it'll give you a good idea in terms of the choices you're making. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there. In terms of B2B, I don't think at this point necessarily, but it's more from a consumer play perspective. I think the other interesting thing is that everyone has adopted Microsoft Teams, Zoom, and Google Meet in terms of how we generally interact in the in a universe where everyone's working from different places. And so the likes of Microsoft Teams, they have got Mesh, which is basically for its metaverse, and they intend previewing it towards the end of this year, which will be a more immersive experience in terms of, I think there are some limitations in terms of Teams and Zoom, so you'll feel as if you're more with your colleagues. So I think that's where the metaverse is going to touch business first, is having these virtual meetings, but where you do feel more part of the meeting room as opposed to screens, and not necessarily engaging like you would in a boardroom.
Okay, great. It's exciting to think, it's exciting to think that we are moving into this new space. Which brings me to a question I have for Conrad, which is, what are some of the challenges standing in the way of the adoption of this and other future tech?
Look, Georgie, I think some of those have been mentioned already. But I mean, I think something that we haven't spoken about is, particularly when you think about the metaverse, there's a reliance on a lot of emerging technology. Things like edge computing, Wi-Fi, 5G, etc. So, and while particularly in Africa, I think you've got to think about the kind of infrastructure that one needs to run some of this kind of technology and to access some of this technology. And I think sort of accessibility, particularly in an African context, South African context, will be one of the challenges. The second one I can think of is the speed of change, speed of innovation. It reminds me of in the early 2000s, just before the dot-com bubble, where you've got something's here today, gone tomorrow, so you've got to, in some ways, you've got to be careful about nailing your colors to the mast too early. And then regulatory uncertainty, I think Markos mentioned it, especially around privacy. Megan mentioned interoperability. There are many instances of the metaverse, and today they don't interoperate. So you cannot buy an asset in one metaverse and use it in another. And I think that's the vision, of one metaverse. So when we get to that point will be interesting. And finally, I think there's some softer issues that we need to think about, particularly in the metaverse conversation. We know that online bullying, for example, is a big deal in social media world. So can you imagine the kind of human impacts that one would be looking at in a virtual 3D kind of environment when it comes to regulating behavior? And also, if you think about mental health, and we know it's well documented that the contribution of social media to mental health issues, and I think there's still a lot of unpacking that needs to be done in that space going into the future.
Okay, great. I'm just keeping an eye on the time because we always do like to give the audience the opportunity to pose some of their questions. So we will get that. But just very quickly, I'd like to sort of go back to Megan. When you talk about working in a hybrid workplace, you've got the technologies that enable that. But you were mentioning to me that you also have these very strong feelings about the not technology part of hybrid, the other half. So can you just give us some insights into your feelings about the importance of face-to-face?
So I don't think you can discount face-to-face. I think the problem with online, and you have seen some of the effects during COVID where people joined online and left online, your relationship with the business you work for becomes very transactional, and you don't necessarily have any loyalty or affiliation to the people and the company you work for. So I think that's something that you're never going to be able to replace. And so it's how do you find that human connection and make sure that people feel they're a part of something and they've got a purpose that they're pursuing. And that's why I still think you need to have hybrid. You can't have purely everyone working online. And we've also been playing around with what are those kind of things digitally that can make people connect. And so some of the things that we've done is on a monthly basis, we've got called as the water cooler. And our CEO, it's like a live TV show where we just do some fun things and interaction with staff. So you get a sense of the culture and what's going on in the organization. when you're not walking the floor and seeing people on a daily basis. So it's how do you bring the digital world into that? And we've also been thinking a lot more in terms of having a single platform. I think a lot of people are grappling at the moment with, you've got this app and that app, and you've got SharePoint and Teams, and you don't necessarily know where to find everything. So how do you find or have one place where everyone can interact and meet? And then I suppose the last issue for me is, and I've seen it with the audit profession going through 2 years of audits online, is that I don't think you can ever replace the on-the-job learning, or when people are working together and they've got a problem and they're talking about it and someone across the desk can say, well, this is how you do that. I think we need to guard against that and make sure that the people who are coming into the workplace are getting the adequate on-the-job training. And they also, I think a lot of the times during COVID, people felt isolated. They're sitting by themselves at home, and they've got an issue or problem, and they don't necessarily want to set up a formal call to close out that issue, when it would have just been easy to ask the person sitting next to you, how do I solve that? And so those are some of the challenges I think that we have in terms of purely working online.
Yeah, I mean, we had so much of that where we had one office day a week, and I would say, I'll show you on the next office day, and then that person would miss that office day. And then it was a whole nother week before we could just show them how to do that one simple thing on the computer. So yeah, the face-to-face part definitely has a value in a space. Zaf, can you pop back on camera for us? There you are. You know, it's a little bit, it relates a little bit to what we've been talking about now with Megan. So digitization is a future tech that was supposed to be disrupting finance teams. Tell me your views on how it's changing the way finance teams actually operate.
Yeah, so I'm going to take a slightly different view. You know, Excel was supposed to make us more efficient. I think it's made us more inefficient. You know, maybe I'm showing my age, but when I served my articles, we didn't have laptops or mobile phones at the time, and we managed just fine. I think what you've seen is a big volume of transactions, and it's the point that Markos made. It's how do you extract the efficiencies from digitization? And so in the audit world, I think the biggest challenge is going to be, well, we've done all of these nice things on digital, and we're looking at tokens and so on. So the question I want to put to everybody is, would you consider airtime a currency or a type of currency? Because that's what we consider it as. You know, we issue airtime and you can exchange it for things. So is it an existing fungible token or non-fungible token, however you want to define that? And some of the things that are being done, whether it's you know, loyalty programs, where there is a type of currency that's not a typical currency, and those have been in existence for some time. The question is, well, what monetary value does it have? How does the customer monetize that? The next thing I want to talk about is the Oracles and SAPs of the world. Are they also going to be disrupted? And so the challenge for the finance teams is, how do we find new ways of mining data in a company? Because the days of just looking at data and reporting data are gone, and Megan made the point. Finance teams are far more required these days to say, well, what are the insights from this enormous amounts of data? So digitalization has given us access to lovely amounts of data and lots of it. Well, what do you do with it, and what does it mean? And so what does it mean not only for the business, but for all of your stakeholders? And I think one of the participants talked about co-opetition. That's really where the world is going. If you look at us, for example, we made a decision that we were not going to continue to be an infrastructure provider, because for the last 25 years, Vodacom and MTN have just, you know, destroyed everybody else in that space. Even if we were to spend 20, 30 billion rand a year, we would never catch up with them. But through technology, we can leap over them, as mobile money has done in Africa, and, you know, leapt over all of the existing Western technologies that existed. So the question then becomes, and the challenge for South Africa in particular, is that if you don't enable digital for all citizens, you create a new type of inequality that's created because you have access to only a certain part for certain people in the economy. And that's the danger here, is that how do we as responsible corporates and make sure that our customers have access to digital? So I'll leave it there. I'm not sure I've answered the question, but I'll leave it there.
No, you did. Thanks very much, Zaf. We could carry on this conversation all day. It's fascinating stuff. But let's give the audience a chance to be heard. Just a quick one, Kim. Marcus is asking you to clarify what you mean by the concept of banking malls. Could you, if you could clarify that in the chat, we can address your question. So David asked, what advantages will the digital currency developed specifically for South Africa hold? Quicker turnaround time, easier traceability, lower costs. Conrad, I don't know if that's if I can pick on you there.
The answer to David is yes. So he's actually put his finger on it. I think in our South African context, I think obviously banking the unbanked becomes quite an important aspect of that. So so I think the accessibility aspect is important. But if you think about this concept of removing the middleman or reducing the middleman, that really talks to increased efficiency, lower cost, and accessibility. But I think the right points have been made there.
Okay. Great. Always nice when the person answers their own question. From Snazzo, we have the question, does the panel believe that legislation is moving in time with the technological advancements? And if not, what are the major obstacles that you've encountered? I don't know if there's, if there's a specific someone who'd like to jump on that.
I'm happy to comment.
Great. Thanks,
Georgina. So, I mean, from our perspective, I think it's been slow. Personally, globally, I think legislation has taken a long time to keep up pace, and the worries are more on kind of, are people paying tax on their cryptos and the likes, as opposed to kind of actually thinking about how we integrate this legislation to make this part of the actual financial system as opposed to sitting outside of it in many respects as a separate asset class. I think part of the challenge is also that by its very nature, individuals want it because of its decentralized nature. We're breaking away from rules. No one can control my money as a concept. But without the rules, I don't think it ever gets to 1 billion people using it. And to Zaf's point, if you want to get the real benefit of this this gem that's been created in a blockchain and this sort of more efficient means and secure means of moving money globally, the best way to do it is to have some legislation that protects the consumer and the customer around it. So those are things that definitely need to be considered. But in my personal view, it needs to happen a bit faster.
Yeah, that's almost always the case, isn't it?
Georgie, if I could just add, it took 15 years to issue new spectrum. If we really want to make sure that as South African, and there's every opportunity for us to leapfrog, I use the word leapfrog in terms of what Africa is capable of doing. We have the companies, I mean, FNB is an excellent example of that, EOH, excellent example of the quality of corporates in South Africa to be able to leapfrog over everyone else in the world. You have fantastic people, really clever people, good corporates, good asset base. We just need to make sure that the legislation keeps up and is more of an enabler. I mentioned the point that it's easier to get a bond than it is to get a cell phone contract. That's up to us. I'm not sure how it is in FNB, but to open a bank account or whatever, it's just sticky. And we need to make sure that we reduce that stickiness for the customer. And legislation can really help in that space.
Okay, fantastic. Well, here's hoping. We had a question from Luyanda who said, how do we integrate these new fintech technologies such as blockchain into legacy systems? So I don't know, Conrad, that feels like maybe a you question again.
Yeah, I think, and there's a related question I've just seen around, I think someone's saying, it's Ronald saying, we talk about integration very easily. Without question, legacy and new world integration is one of the big, and often when you look at a lot of the stuff, it's assumed that things get implemented into a greenfield environment, but we know that's not true. Banks, insurance companies, financial services, telcos have got legacy to integrate with. So it's it is one of the big challenges, and it's unique for every company. There are, of course, some practices around how to do that effectively. And particularly, I mentioned earlier that there's some speed to market benefits that come with leveraging some capabilities in the cloud. But I mean, there's no easy answer to integration, particularly when you've got legacy issues to deal with, and it is a unique challenge for every company.
Okay, great. And now it seems the audience's ears pricked up when they heard about your adoption of new technologies at EOH, Megan. So we've had two separate questions, one asking about the cloud-native ERP you've adopted, and then the other asking about your chosen consolidation, budget systems, and BI tools to access data. So if you can give us a shopping list, please.
So from a ERP perspective, and it also depends on organizational size and complexity, so that, obviously is a big factor in terms of the choice you make. But we went with Oracle NetSuite. Oracle actually bought NetSuite and it was made in the cloud for the cloud. And I think that's important because there you have seen a lot of firms or OEMs where they've tried to migrate their on-premise type of system into the cloud, and that hasn't always worked well. So it's better to go with something that's built in the cloud for the cloud. And then from a BI tool perspective, we use Click as our BI tool, and it's been very successful from our perspective. And then also from a consolidation tool perspective, you've got the likes of Hyperion, which is also an Oracle tool. But those are really for big blue chip complex type of companies. And then we've gone with IBM Cognos Controller, which comes in at a different price point and is pretty quick and easy to configure. So it really does depend on the organization you sit in and what problem and the level of complexity you're trying to solve.
Okay, great. So I think we've got time for one last question, and a nice one's just popped up for Markos on the talent war, which was definitely raised. What specific talents are currently in high demand in your space?
Yeah, I mean, I would say any activity around data science or quantitative sort of skill sets, as well as developers and technologists that can take what businesses ideating and translated into a technology solution for customers, and then obviously to overlay that, then customer experience experts that can then make it look and feel good for customers. Any of those kind of, call it, areas at the moment are certainly in high demand, and the price point globally is increasing significantly just because of the scarcity of it.
Okay, great. And actually, we could open that up to everyone. Do you have any sort of specific sought after skill sets that you're targeting right now? Megan, let's go to you first, and then we'll go to Zaf.
Yeah, so I'll actually echo exactly what Markos said. And I think also the change that's come from COVID, people have realized that we actually are one global community. And historically, people thought, well, you had to be in another country to go and work there. Now, what we found, especially in the IT space, where we're probably 40% cheaper, at least, than first world, is that people can sit in Cape Town and work for someone in Silicon Valley and get paid very differently. And that's really what we're battling with at the moment. And it's exactly those skill sets that Markos has said.
Zaf, do you have another echo,
Yeah.
or have you got a sneaky other?
In addition to what the two panelists have said, the big area is cybersecurity. This issue of ransomware and protecting from attacks, DDoS attacks and the like. Cybersecurity is the next big thing, because hackers of this globalization has meant that hacking is global too. So cybersecurity skills is absolutely in demand.
Okay. All right, fantastic. I mean, I've seen more questions coming in. I saw a great one coming in from Michael asking about the younger generation. What can they teach us about accessing the metaverse, considering they have pretty much been in the metaverse for longer than most of us? I think that it's a very valid point, and I think that we will see a younger workforce coming in. So yeah, just anyone a final word on that very quickly before I hand over to Conrad for a summary. Last 3 points.
Georgina, just one comment on that. I mean, as part of this, I did an interesting Google search, and I found out that people spend, on average, the average person spends 147 minutes per day on social media. And that is a form of metaverse each of us go to live this world of our own pictures, our friends, whatever it is, and the like. So that's just going to evolve to you visiting your house in a 3D world in some space. So personally, we've got lots to learn from the younger generation, because I certainly didn't know that we spend so much time daily on that social media world. But I certainly watch my children on Minecraft, and they could live there all day. In fact, food isn't even a necessity when they're playing. So definitely lots to learn from the youth here. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. So Conrad, yeah, I'd just like to hand over to you for three key takeaway points for the audience around what we've discussed here today.
Thanks, Georgie. I think probably the most important thing is the need to be proactive. I mean, not all this stuff is here today. Some of it's on the horizon, but further out. But I think the message here is, keep your eyes out and be proactive and look ahead at these things. I think it's important to choose your use cases with care. Make sure that when you start experimenting, these things are not the panacea for every business problem. And I think that's also a pitfall to avoid. Legislation we've spoken about. A lot of this stuff is not legislated, but I do believe things will speed up and legislation will be forced to catch up. And then lastly, just remember that this space, I've said it before, don't nail your colors to the mast too early. The space is moving very quickly, and what it looks like in 5-10 years from now might be very different to what it looks like today. Much like we've seen, with the advent of the internet and the dot-com bubble back in 2000. So be aware, be proactive, but proceed with caution.
Okay, fantastic. Good words of caution after all the hype around the exciting new frontier that we're in. Conrad, Markos, Megan, Zaf, thank you so much for making the time to share your insights with our audience today. It was really great to have you here. Very exciting conversation. I could have carried on. I'm just going to try to share my screen, which I'm not brilliant at, to see if I can tell you about the next webinar we have coming up, but I'm very bad at this, so please excuse me. Next week we have Lift While You Rise. It's a Women's Month webinar, but we'll also be talking to a male CFO about what can be done to create accommodating spaces for women in the workplace in South Africa. So I hope you'll sign up for that one as well. It's on the 11th of August at 11 a.m. And you can visit cfo.co.za/events. To sign up for that one. Thanks once again, everybody. It was absolutely fantastic to have you here. Thanks, Markos, for your comment. Happy Women's Month to all the power ladies on the call. Thank you for that. Great to have you here. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Over and out.